We're going to be in Exodus today, picking up where we left off last time, at the end of chapter 15. So it's starting at chapter 15, verse 22. I'll wait a little bit here. So remember we had they came to the Red Sea and they did their song and their dance, celebrating the Lord's victory. And now, I'm actually going to start today with some verses from Deuteronomy, where Moses, in his farewell sermon, is reflecting on this period of time that's coming next. He says this, "And you shall remember the whole way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. And he humbled you, and let you hunger, and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord." Do you think the Israelites had seen enough yet? Do you think they've seen enough yet to know that the Lord is true and faithful and powerful? Do you think they've seen enough to trust in him, to trust his promises, the ones he made to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the ones he made to them, to trust that Moses is his servant and that the Lord has a plan to bring them into his land? They should have. So far, God has treated them with the kid gloves. He's been extremely patient with their weakness and unbelief because of their harsh slavery. He's shown them his power over and over. All that stuff that he did with Pharaoh, the reason that he wanted to harden Pharaoh's heart after Pharaoh hardened his own was to make it worse. God wanted to show greater plagues. Why? To get glory over Pharaoh so that the Israelites would see. We talked about this before. All this is aimed at building up their faith, giving them reason to trust in him. And now he's going to test them. They've had the first unit, the lesson from God and his faithfulness and power. And now he's going to see if they trust it or not. Let's go to Exodus 15, verses 22 to 27. I gotta load that here quick. I thought I had it up. Here we go. All right, Exodus 15, verses 22 to 27. "Then Moses made Israel set out from the Red Sea, and they went into the wilderness of Shur. They went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. Therefore it was named Marah. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, 'What shall we drink?' And he cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a log. And he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There the Lord made for them a statute and a rule, and there he tested them, saying, 'If you will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God, and do that which is right in his eyes, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord your healer.' Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they encamped there by the water." So, he brings them there tomorrow. They're 3 days into the wilderness. It's just been 3 days since the Red Sea, since the dancing and the singing and the victory. 3 days since he destroyed Pharaoh and all of his army. Such a terrifying enemy that they couldn't do anything about. When Moses had said to them, "Stand still and you will see the salvation of the Lord." Just 3 days. And the first time that they're tested, how do they react? The test is this: there's no water. Now, do they need water? Absolutely. It's been 3 days marching. They've run out of water. Humans can't go very long without water. They don't see water anywhere. They're out there in the wilderness. They're out there in the desert, right? It's a problem. But what do? They grumble and complain and doubt instead of praying. It isn't that God thought that they should just not care that they didn't have water. It's that God wanted them to pray to him. He's telling them, "Look what I've done for you. Trust me to provide for you." But instead, we have the beginning of a theme. This is going to repeat itself over and over. Whenever they need something, they grumble and they complain. Now, notice what else they do here. They grumble against Moses. They don't even grumble to God. They grumble against Moses. Why'd you bring us out here? By contrast, Moses prays. Moses brings the grumbling of the people, the need of the people, to God in prayer. And here, God is still kind of got the kid gloves on. He's still patient with them. He tells Moses, take that log, throw it into the water. The bitter water will become sweet. They had called it Mara because it was bitter. That's what the word Mara means, but it turns sweet. It probably means, I don't know if the water was like, it tasted bad, it was poisonous, it was like maybe a stagnant pool, like a swamp or something like that, and you couldn't drink from it. He throws in the log, and it's pure. This maybe it's like a filter for your faucet, right? Except obviously miraculous that God does this. And then he promises them, if you'll trust me and walk in the way of my commandments, I won't put any of the plagues on you that I put on the Egyptians. He wants them to know, look, I've shown you my power to destroy. And that should show you that I'm powerful, that I keep my promises, that I rescued you. It should also give you terror of my law. But now he's saying that's not the God that I desire to be. I don't want to be the God of vengeance to you. You're my people. I'm going to be the Lord, your healer. In Egypt, God turned the waters to blood. God destroyed their food. Here, he turns the bitter waters sweet. And he's teaching the children of Israel that. There, I destroyed all that they had. Here, I'll provide for you out of nothing. That's who I am. I'm Jehovah, your healer. So you're going to see too in this section, we have God providing water in two ways. First, miraculously turning the bitter water sweet, and then they come to Elim where there's all these springs of water. It's an oasis. He's also providing through normal means, and that's a reminder to us. With the children of Israel, God is usually going to provide for them in these miraculous ways while they're in the wilderness. And then when he brings them to the land of Canaan and plants them there, the manna, which we'll see later, it doesn't fall anymore. Well, because now there's food there in the land. He's providing for them through means. This is the ordinary way that God has providing for us, through means. He gives us food to grow in its season. He gives us water from our faucets, right? Warmth from our furnaces. He is the one who gives and provides these things. They all come from him. Just because they're not miracles doesn't mean we should thank him any less for them. Let's go on to chapter 16. I'll go back one here. And we'll read verses 1 through 3 to get started. They set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the people of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had departed from the land of Egypt. And the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness, and the people of Israel said to them, would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full, for you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Again, they don't make it very far. It is only a coincidence that it's called the wilderness of sin. The word sin in Hebrew doesn't mean sin like it does in English. It's kind of funny, though, because they do a whole lot of sinning in the wilderness of sin. And again, they're speaking blasphemously. Not only they're claiming that it's Moses who brought them out and not God. They keep blaming Moses instead of turning to God. And it's also blasphemous unbelief how quickly they forget all that God has done. How quickly they constantly go back to this frame. You're going to see it over and over. I wish we were in Egypt. It'd be better if we were in Egypt than if we had died out here in the wilderness. They keep thinking that God has brought them out there to die, as if that makes any sense at all, when he's the one that rescued them. So they don't ask for anything here. They just grumble and complain, and they do so dramatically. If you've got kids at home, you've probably run across this, right? We've been trying to remind Anastasia of this. When something isn't working, a lot of times her first reaction is to just kind of scream and wail dramatically. And I'm just like, just ask for help, and we can help you. We want to help you. It's that way with us and God. He's teaching us to pray. That's part of the test here. Unbelief complains. Faith prays. Verses 4 through 8. Then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I'm about to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them, whether they will walk in my law or not. On the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily. So Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, At evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he hath heard your grumbling against the Lord. For what are we that you grumble against us? And Moses said, When the Lord gives you in the evening meat to eat, and in the morning bread to the full, because the Lord has heard your grumbling that you grumble against him, what are we? Your grumbling is not against us, but against the Lord. Moses reminds them who they are really grumbling against. That's a reminder too. When we grumble against the people that God has put in authority over us, we're really grumbling against God. When we grumble about a new tax, now, I'm not talking about exercising our right in a democracy to discuss whether something is good or not. I'm not even talking about criticizing laws. I'm talking about grumbling about them. There's a difference. And when we grumble about things like that, we're really grumbling against God. And when we grumble about, the pastor or the teacher, if we don't like their style, or we don't like the decision that they made, we're really grumbling against God. That's what Moses reminds them of here. So the Lord still, in patience, all right, they're really not doing well with these tests, but in patience, he's going to give them food. Moses tells them it's going to happen. So he talks about the evening and the morning, and we're going to learn later what that refers to, the quail that will come in the evening and the manna that will come in the morning. And notice again what it says, to test them. That's what Moses mentioned in Deuteronomy. The Lord led you by a way that you did not know. And he fed you with bread that you did not know, so that you might know. He tested you in the wilderness. And he's trying to teach you something. That tells us something about what God does with his testing, okay? God's tests are meant to teach us something. God doesn't need to know what we know, right? See, there's really two purposes that a good teacher can have for a test. One of them, and this is not as common, but you definitely need it sometimes, is you need to know how much your students know. So you know where to start with and where to take them and how to teach them, right? God doesn't need to know that. He knows us, right? The other purpose, this is the main purpose for a test, is to teach students. And I think that's really important. Good teachers always understand this. They understand that the purpose of the test isn't like a gotcha moment. And it isn't just to find out how much the student knows. It is to bring the student to learn. And so a good test is designed both to challenge a student and set them up to be able to succeed so that they will learn. Challenge them by giving them plenty to study, but set them up to succeed by telling them exactly what to study. Right? No surprises. And make it clear and make it easy enough for them to be able to accomplish it, right? God's tests are always designed to teach us. And they're always designed to teach us the same thing. They're designed to teach us to trust him. And that's what these tests in the wilderness are for. Let's go on, verses 9 through 21. Then Moses said to Aaron, Say to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, Come near before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling. And as soon as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the people of Israel. Say to them, At twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God. In the evening, quail came up and covered the camp, and in the morning dew lay around the camp. And when the dew had gone up, there was on the face of the wilderness a fine flake-like thing, fine as frost on the ground. When the people of Israel saw it, they said to one another, What is it? For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather of it, each one of you, as much as he can eat. You shall each take an omer, according to the number of the persons that each of you has in his tent. And the people of Israel did so. They gathered, some more, some less. But when they measured it with an omer, whoever gathered much had nothing left over, and whoever gathered little had no lack. Each of them gathered as much as he could eat. And Moses said to them, Let no one leave any of it over till the morning. But they did not listen to Moses. Some left part of it till the morning, and it bred worms and stank, and Moses was angry with them. Morning by morning they gathered it, each as much as he could eat. But when the sun grew hot, it melted. And they call it manna, because manna means, what is it? When they saw it, what is it? Kind of amazing, right? To go out and see the ground's covered with this white thing, looks like frost on the ground. And it's this white grain that they could grind up and turn into flour. Now here's the test with the manna. He tells them, only gather what you need for today. Right? There's no point in getting any more because I'm going to give you more tomorrow. And he tells them, if you gather too much, whatever you keep over until the morning, well, it's gonna go bad. It's gonna rot. It's gonna be full of worms. You don't need to either. But of course, the people don't listen. They gather extra. Why? Because they don't trust the Lord. Despite the fact that he's just rained bread down out of heaven, they don't actually trust that he's going to do it again tomorrow. So they get extra. What's God trying to teach them? It's very much like in the Lord's Prayer when he teaches us to pray, give us this day our daily bread. And in the Sermon on the Mount, do not worry about tomorrow. He's saying trust God each day for what is needed for that day. Trust the Lord in each tribulation and temptation for his grace in that moment. This doesn't mean you can't make plans for the future. It doesn't mean you shouldn't have a saving account or anything like that. But the point is, man plans his way, the Lord directs his steps. Say, don't be anxious. Don't worry about all of those things. And certainly don't sin because you're worried about those things. So often that's the reason for sin. We're worried about what might happen later. And so we sin now. That's kind of where greed and covetousness and stinginess come into view, right? Somebody needs help from us, and we're able to help them, but we think, well, if I give this away, then what am I going to have for that? Don't worry about tomorrow. This part of this passage here is quoted in a really interesting way in the New Testament. When it says, whoever gathered little had no lack, whoever gathered much had none left over. That's quoted by Paul. This is being used in a miraculous way, right? Saying, somebody went out and they gathered some, but they didn't quite gather a ton. Well, they still had plenty for the day. And somebody else, they gathered, too much. Well, they didn't have any left over. They used it up. Except for the people that, intentionally tried to gather too much, right? And what Paul quotes us about in Corinthians is when he's talking about the offering for the saints of Jerusalem, and he's talking about Christian giving. I'm pretty sure that's where it is. And he's talking about this, and it's really interesting the point that he's making, because obviously the way God provided for them here was miraculous. But he's saying that now, in the Christian church, he's saying no one should have too little and no one needs to have too much, because we're to provide for each other. He's saying that the body of Christ, the church, we are the way that God miraculously provides for one another. And when one of us needs help, he calls us to love one another and thereby show the world that we're his disciples. And we do this when we trust God each day to provide what we need, and we're not worried and we're not anxious about the future. That's where greed and covetousness comes from. But faith in God and in his love for us, it brings us to provide for those who are in need generously, without worrying about the future, without worrying about what we want or what we need. Of course, the people don't listen. They gather extra the first day. At least they do it the first day. I don't know if they keep doing that. And obviously, the only reason that you would do that is if you don't actually trust God, there's going to be more the next day. It's like if you're a little kid at a buffet and you take way too much, or at a potluck. Back when we had potlucks. Oh, it's going to be good when COVID's over. We're going to have some potlucks, right? And you take way too much, and mom says, you can always go back for more. Don't take so much. And you don't listen to her. This is what's at the base of greed, this lack of trust in God. And that's the way that the first commandment and the last commandments mirror each other. You shall fear, love, and trust. You shall have no other God. You should fear, love, and trust in God above all things, versus you shall not covet. The root of covetousness is idolatry. When we love something else more than God. If we love God and trust in God more than anything, well, that casts out all covetousness, because we're content in him. We trust in him to provide what we need. Everything comes back to that first commandment. Let's go on with verses 22 through 30. On the sixth day, they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers each. And when all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, he said to them, this is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over lay aside to be kept till the morning. So they laid it aside till the morning, as Moses commanded them, and it did not stink, and there were no worms in it. Moses said, eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, which is a Sabbath, there will be none. On the 7th day, some of the people went out to gather, but they found none. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See, The Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, on the 6th day, he gives you bread for 2 days. Remain each of you in his place. Let no one go out of his place on the 7th day. So the people rested on the 7th day. So there's 2 tests here. The first is, he says, don't gather extra. There'll be more tomorrow. And they don't listen. The second test is, okay, are they going to learn here? The second test is, on the 6th day you can gather twice as much, and it won't spoil. That part they do no problem. Okay? They have no problem gathering the extra. But he tells them the reason you gather extra today is because tomorrow there won't be any. There won't be any out there for you to gather because I don't want you to work. I want you to take the day off. But some of them still go out to see if there's any there because they still don't trust in the Lord. They don't care about God's commandment not to work either. And for some reason they're still greedy for more. Think about this. God tells them, take the day off. Rest. Eat. Chill. Relax. Tell stories. Play with your kids. And I don't want to. Some of them at least. Think about how the Jews later turned this into a work as well. Think about how crazy this is, that they turned the Sabbath day into this kind of onerous commandment. They literally turned relax and rest and do nothing into a work to do for God. They made it tedious and onerous, which was never the point of it. The point was rest, which was a picture of Jesus, who's our rest. Verses 31 to 36. Now the house of Israel called its name manna. It was like coriander seed. Oh, before I go on, one thought on that I almost forgot. We sinners do this with a lot of things. God gives us these blessings, and we turn them into these works. Sometimes we view them as troublesome things that are difficult that we don't want to do. Sometimes we view them as things that we do for God. This is what going to church often becomes. Okay, God calls us to come to church, not as a commandment of the law, but as an invitation of the gospel. Right? He says, there's blessings here for you. My word is here. This fellowship here. My sacrament is here. The forgiveness of sins. Come to church. I want you there, he says. This is great. And far too easily we can flip into one of 2 sinful ways of thinking. One, we can think, I don't really want to do that. It's boring. It's too much work. I can just do it on my own. I'm not referencing COVID right now. In COVID, there could be legitimate reasons to stay home and watch. But, aside from that, thinking, well, it's just the same if I watch it at home. It's not. There's legitimate reasons with COVID, but there are things that you're just missing at home. That's part of what's hard about this. And it's an important thing to keep in mind. When things do start going back to normal, don't let that become the habit. Don't let it become the habit to think, well, we'll just keep doing this. I'm hopeful, actually, that will have the opposite result. I think God can use it in that way, where this time when, for legitimate reasons, some people can't come or don't think it's wise to come in person, they're reminded of what they're missing when they can't do that. And will be overjoyed to be able to come and rejoice in those blessings. That God will use that to show us what a blessed thing it is to gather in his name. Well, the other thing that we can do, the other sinful attitude we can have towards it, is if we kind of turn it into something we do for God. Like they did with the Sabbath. This is something God's giving to us. The Sabbath was something God gave to them. Rest. And a picture of Jesus. And sometimes we come to church and we think, oh yeah, I came to church today, so I'm good with God. Pat myself on the back. Look, God, I did this for you. God's not impressed by that. He invites you here, you sinners, to give you his blessings, not for you to do something for him. Verses 31 to 36. Now the house of Israel called its name manna. It was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. Moses said, this is what the Lord has commanded. Let an omer of it be kept throughout your generations, so that they may see the bread with which I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. And Moses said to Aaron, take a jar and put an omer of manna in it, and place it before the Lord to be kept throughout your generations. As the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron placed it before the testimony to be kept. The people of Israel ate the manna 40 years, till they came to a habitable land. They ate the manna till they came to the border of the land of Canaan. An omer is a 10th part of an ephah. By the way, I looked that up. Apparently that's about a half a gallon, an omer is. And so they kept some of that bread in the tabernacle and never went bad, in order to be a reminder of what God had done. Notice the note, it tasted like wafers made with honey. Sounds pretty good, right? To remind them of this for all their generations. This miraculous way. Then notice the note about how they ate it until they came to the border of the land of Canaan, because then God would provide for them through the land that he had promised. So they're not doing very well with the test right now, are they? It's not going well at all. Let's go on with chapter 17. I know we're running past 11 o'clock, but we got a little bit of a late start, so we will keep going here. Chapter 17, and verses 1 through 7. All the congregation of the people of Israel moved on from the wilderness of Sin by stages, according to the commandment of the Lord, and camped at Rephidim. But there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." And Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water, and the people grumbled against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" So Moses cried to the Lord, "What shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me." And the Lord said to Moses, "Pass on before the people, taking with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people will drink." And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the quarreling of the people of Israel, and because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" So Meribah means quarreling, and Massah means testing, because they tested and quarreled with the Lord. Again, the people make both of these mistakes in this ongoing, tiresome repetition. They're mad at Moses, okay? They're complaining against Moses when God's the one who's really in charge, and B, they're quarreling and complaining and grumbling instead of praying. This is what God wants them to do. Pray. When you're tested, God is looking for you to trust His word, go to His promises, and ask Him for the things that He's promised to give you. God had promised to bring them to that land of Canaan. He had promised to rescue them and save them. He had made His promises very clear that He would provide for them. And if He wanted to do that by providing water naturally, providing water miraculously, or snapping His fingers so that they didn't need water anymore, whatever, He could have done it. And that's the point. Remember, I started off with that verse where He said, "The Lord tested you and fed you with bread that you did not know, so that you might know that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of the Lord." You might remember Jesus quotes that in the wilderness when He's being tempted by the devil. Israelites end up being 40 years in the wilderness. Jesus is 40 days in the wilderness. This is not a coincidence. And He keeps quoting things from this whole thing. The first test there is, turn these stones into bread. Well, the children of Israel couldn't turn stones into bread when they were in the wilderness. And when we are hungry, when we're lacking something, we can't do that either. We're being tested. Just like Jesus was tested, just like the Israelites were tested. What are we being tested to do? To trust in the Lord. Jesus came to suffer like us, to be tempted like us. Since when we are tempted, we cannot snap our fingers and turn stones into bread, neither would He, even though He was capable of doing it. He was saying, "I will hunger for as long as the Lord wants me to hunger. If He should want me to hunger until I die, fine." But Jesus also knew that God didn't want that. He knew that God was His Father. He had just said so. "You are my beloved Son." He knew that God had sent Him on this mission to save the world. He knew He had been brought out here to be tempted by the devil, to retrace Israel's steps. And He knew that the Lord would provide food for Him when it was time. And that's what He means. Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of the Lord. He's saying we can live on the word of God. If God wanted us to never eat again and live only on His word, fine. And if God wanted us not to eat and to die, fine. As Job says, "Though He slay me, yet I will trust in Him." People often use their needs as an excuse to sin, right? I like to use the example of the movie Aladdin. They try to make this really sympathetic, right? Oh, you got this poor boy. The only way he can live is by stealing. First of all, why is this 20-year-old or so healthy young man not able to get a job? Okay, whatever. But that's beside the point. Usually, pretty much always, there are some natural means by which we can, get food. But even when we can't, even when we are poor, even when things are really difficult, and there are obviously legitimate reasons why that can happen. If God should want us to starve to death, we should rather do that than sin. We should rather do that than sin. That's the point here. We live on the word of God, not on what we do ourselves, not by grumbling and complaining, but by trust and by prayer. And God has promised to provide us our daily bread. That's the point. He's saying He doesn't want us to starve to death. As long as He wants us here in this life, He's going to provide for us. Not always daily steak. Not always so that we're full. And we're involved in that too. When we have this world of goods and see someone who is lacking, we might be the way that God desires to provide daily bread for someone else. Now, this idea gets transferred here as well, so they might learn. Right? This comes to the second temptation that's involved with Jesus in the wilderness. What does the devil do? Well, he takes him to the mountain. The pinnacle of the temple. He says, throw yourself down. For he said he'll give his angels charge over you to keep you in all your ways. And Jesus says, it is written, you shall not test the Lord your God. That's what's going on here. God is testing the children of Israel, and that makes sense. That's God's prerogative, to test his people. But instead, they are testing him. It says they tested him by saying, is the Lord among us or not? What are they really trying to do there? They're asking, show yourself to us. Prove yourself to us. If you're really our God, if you really care about us. They don't say to the Lord, Lord, we know you are our God. You've shown you are our God. You've promised to provide for us. That's a prayer of faith. Instead, they're saying, prove it, Lord. Why don't you care about us? Why are we out here starving? Why did you lead us out here to die? Is the Lord really among us? And we do this too, don't we? In various ways. When we ask God, show me a sign, God. Or, prove yourself to me in the way that I want you to prove yourself to me. If I'm going to believe in you, then you better prove yourself to me through my reason, or through my feelings, or by making me happy, or giving me what I want in life. Making things go the way that I think they should go. And if you do that, Lord, then I'll believe in you. And if things don't go the way that I think they should in my life and in the world, well, then you can't really be God. I can't believe in a God like who doesn't do what I want. That's us testing God. And instead, he's testing us to learn to simply trust his word, his promise, and his love. Here, when he provides water, notice how this parallels in like an inverse way what happened at the Red Sea. He tells Moses to take his staff. So it says at the Red Sea, he makes mention of that, the staff you use at the Red Sea. When he raised his staff over the Red Sea, God separated the waters. He made dry ground in the midst of the waters. Now he's going to strike the rock, and water's going to come out of the rock, and he's going to make waters in the midst of the dry ground. Whatever he needs, whatever we need, God will provide for his people. And remember how I mentioned last time, too, that passage in 1 Corinthians. They drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. Again, he's showing us that all these things in the wilderness, it's Christ who follows behind them. It's Christ who is this rock who gives them water. He's the one who gives the water of life freely, right? All these are pictures of Jesus and how he provides for us in faith and in his word and our salvation. Verses 8 through 16 to finish up today. Then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. So Moses said to Joshua, choose for us men and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed. And whenever he lowered his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands grew weary. So they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side. So his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and the people with the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this as a memorial in a book and recite it in the ears of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called the name of it, The Lord is my banner, saying, a hand upon the throne of the Lord. The Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Think about what this showed the people of Israel, right? They would only win when Moses' hands were raised. That's not natural, right? It's not because they just took courage from it. Whenever his hands were lowered, they would lose. It proved to them that the victory was the Lord's. It was the Lord blessing them and providing for them. And there's a couple of great points to be made from this, as one of our hymns does. You can be like faithful Aaron holding up the prophet's hands. That we, as members of the congregations, even if we're not the pastor or the teacher or the missionary or whatever, that we are in this work together. That we're united in this cause of proclaiming the gospel, and we help bring that blessing of God's salvation to our communities and throughout the earth, through our prayers, through our offerings, through helping out at church. When the sign-up sheet goes up for whatever, when the council or the pastor's asking if anybody can help with this, that, or the other thing, raise your hand. Here I am, send me. I can do that. And in all these ways, we're joining together in this work. Secondly, the raising of the hands reminds us too how God had taught Aaron to bless the people with the Aaronic Benediction. The Lord bless you and keep you. And when Jesus ascended into heaven, it says his hands were raised in blessing. And as he departs from their sight, there his hands are up. And it's as if that image is frozen in our mind in order to impress upon us Jesus. Moses sits up on that mountain and above the battle and raises his hands so the people will win. Jesus is up there in heaven reigning over all things, and it's as if his hands are raised forever. And they don't get tired. To bless his church, to bless his people. He's ruling over all things for his church right now since he has conquered. Last thing here. Notice how it mentions in detail the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. God is judging Amalek. God is righteous to judge the wicked. And that truth also impresses on us how gracious he is to forgive us. We're wicked too. He had decided now that his patience with Amalek was over and he was going to destroy them. And people will say, that God of the Old Testament is a monster. He would destroy all these people who commit genocide. God made them. God's the judge of the earth. When God judges sin, he is not a monster. He is just. And when God forgives sin, he's not unfair. He's gracious. Praise the Lord for that. We'll pick up next week with chapter 18.